Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the seventh edition of the Sales Vitamin Podcast. I've got a great guest today, Rick Denley. He's a transformational growth expert. He's also the author of the #1 Amazon bestseller book, Reinvent Yourself. We're going to talk about that today. He's been in professional sales for over 25 years. He knows how to lead people. He's a strategic, motivational person. And Rick, it is great to have you on the Sales Vitamin Podcast. I know everybody is going to get a lot of vitamins today.
Thanks, John. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Man, it's great. Hey, before we get started, tell everybody a little bit about you, what you're doing right now, what you're up to, and kind of your background.
Great. I appreciate that. Listen, I spent over 25 years in the corporate world helping lead individuals and organizations in sales and growth. And about 3 years ago, I made the change to go out on my own and do that as an entrepreneur. I just felt that I could help and work with more people if I were out doing it on my own. And that's what I'm doing right now. And I'm enjoying it, the challenges that go with it, and the opportunity to work with so many great people.
Awesome. Awesome. So let's start with this question. So if I were to say, Rick, you've been hired to reinvent a sales team.
Yeah.
And, because that's such a big word these days, and we'll talk about that later today in the podcast, but reinventing yourself, but you've been hired, you're going to reinvent a sales team. What method would you use and why? And then how would you explain that to the sales team as far as, hey, we're going to reinvent this sales team? Because that could be scary to some people.
Well, sure, it can be scary, and reinvention in itself can be scary. We talk about the fears of reinventing ourselves and change. The interesting part, John, about change is that we have to understand that there's two types. There's a type that we decide to create. A few years ago, I decided to make a change, leave corporate world, go out on my own as an entrepreneur so I could help more people and organizations. Then there's a second type of change, the one that comes our way that we didn't anticipate. And this happens more often than not. COVID-19 is a great example of that. But in either case of change, we need to get out in front of it. We need to lead that change. So once we get our heads around that and we get better at it, the more that we change, our brain understands it better. It has muscle memory, just like if we work out and build up the bicep, it remembers that. So we need to change on a regular basis going forward. So you asked me the question about a sales team, and we get in front of them and we want to reinvent them and change them. The first thing we need to do is understand what's been making them successful to date, because they are successful people and they are doing really well. So let's understand that first. And then we want to figure out where are some areas that we might be able to grow in. Just as a coach would with athletes, they'll figure out some finite areas that they can get better. If you're a baseball player and at the plate you decide that you want to get better at hitting home runs, then they tweak you. They look at it and say, okay, there's some areas here that we can adjust. Even though you're good, we're going to make you better. So the first thing to do, just like in sales, is understand. Understand the individual, understand the organization. And we do that through some online assessments that look at their sales skills, knowledge, and the tools that they use. So understand that first. Then let's create a plan. Let's create a personal action plan for each individual in the organization. I don't like broad brush type training.
Okay.
It can fill some gaps for some, but not others. Let's look at the individual specifically and see how we can help build on their strengths and lessen their weaknesses. And we go in and do that and look at the individuals and the team overall. So that's something very important. When we do that, the individual feels much more at ease because they realize, okay, they recognize that I'm good at what I do. They're just looking to make me better. They're looking to polish me. And we should always be polishing to become better at what we do.
Absolutely. Now, what kind of separates the transformational growth strategy from maybe just a normal sales growth strategy, and, on an individual basis? For example, if you said, hey, John, this is a transformational reinvention strategy versus, hey, here's a typical sales, improvement strategy. What's that fine line, or is there a fine line of separation?
There is actually, to me, the difference is that when you look at a reinvention, transformational growth change for sales organization, it's all encompassing. It's not just small bits here and there. We're looking at the three key pillars here. All right. And the first off is shared methodology. What is your sales process? A repeatable winning sales process for your entire organization. Yeah, it can be industry specific, but it can be used by everybody in the organization so that they have the same level of sales process. Then the second part is continuous reinforcement. When we look at coaching, how are we coaching these individuals on an ongoing basis? Again, not a 2 or 3 day training course, which studies have shown we lose 80% of the knowledge in the first few months. Ongoing, repeatable reinforcing of the proper habits and skills. And then finally, we want to layer on that technology. How are we utilizing the most up-to-date tools that are available to us, and not just CRMs, but all the other tools? An interesting point on that, John, is nowadays with COVID-19, the way that we've had to change our selling approaches is that we're using many more tools,
Right.
online tools, from Zoom calls to all sorts of other type of video and things that we need to adapt to what we'll call the new norm going forward, because it's not going away for quite a while. So that's when we look at transformational growth and change. We're looking at all encompassing here on those 3 pillars of the sales organization.
And what are the main tools that you kind of focus on? You mentioned technology, obviously being a big one, but what are some of the other tools from a transformational change standpoint that you kind of focus on?
Yeah, it's a good point. One of the things that I talk about in the book, and I'll bring it out now because it's relevant,
Yeah.
is that we need a real plan. Now, listen, and you're going to ask me about it later, I know, probably along with the picture behind me right
Yep.
over here. But, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. Everybody had a plan come January, February, and then March came along with COVID-19, and we took it right in the chops.
Right.
So one of the things we need to do is make sure that we have a plan that's flexible and can change as needed, but plan for each situation, and not a long-term plan now. We realize that those don't work. We have to adapt and move very quickly. It's the small and nimble that are eating the large right now. The ones that can turn on a dime, create a plan, and execute quickly. The ones that can change expectations and communicate those extremely well to their sales team and others within the organization. So that in itself is a tool when you plan correctly.
What would you say, and I'll go back to you because you held the book up, the Reinvent Yourself book. I'm talking with Rick Denley. He is the author. This is the #1 Amazon bestseller book, Reinvent Yourself. When you talk about reinventing yourself as a sales professional, what's the impact there for the sales professional to reinvent themselves?
Things are changing on an ongoing basis now. You can't use the same type of selling skills that you did a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
Right.
When we go back, we look at different selling types, and we look at integration selling. We looked at consultative selling. We looked at challenger selling, and they just keep changing as we go forward. Back in the day, we looked at all different selling mandates, and they keep changing. One of the main keys for professionals going forward is to understand that we have to keep an open mind. We have to be early adopters in new technologies and new selling platforms. And we have to have the right attitude more than anything else. Without going into details of specific selling methodologies and technologies, we have to have the right attitude. In fact, a long time ago, we used to hire based on skills and history. Now we base our hiring on attitude, because I can teach the skills necessary to be successful if people have an open mind and the right attitude.
What was going back to the book, Reinvent Yourself, what was the hardest part of reinventing yourself and writing this book and going through the process? Because you actually are in the process right now, reinventing yourself and this new chapter in your career. What's been the hardest part?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. You know what? In my personal life, I've had to reinvent myself on occasion. In my career, I've had to reinvent myself. And others, your viewers right now, I'm sure, are in the same. They're either fixing up some sort of mess, on a mission of some sort, or creating a movement. And that's what reinvention is about on an ongoing basis. So you asked me the question, what was the most challenging part for me? I would say getting started. Too often we get marred down and we don't take that first step. And what's the best way to get to the top of a staircase? One step at a time. Take
Right.
the first step. You have to take that first step and get the ball rolling. Don't be mired down. Don't be trapped. And a lot of times when we talk about it in the book as well, we talk about fear and the key different kinds of fear that they are and how you can harness that fear energy in your favor to reinvent yourself.
Yeah, you talk about that in the book, and I want to talk about it a little bit, the feeding off of the adversity. And obviously in sales. So how do you teach the people that you work with and the organizations that you teach? Because it's in the book, the feeding on adversity. What's the most important thing about that?
You know what? When you look at feeding off adversity, we have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that's a tough thing for people to wrap their head around because we like to get comfortable. That's what the brain is used to. It's used to habit. And good habits are what we want to form all the time. But we need to get used to relevant, frequent change. And we
Right.
have to be positive about it as well. And we'll actually get better at it, which is the thing. What I've learned throughout my different reinventions and changes is that you do get better at it. Yes, I created something here to help people create a blueprint so that they can get through whatever mess, mission, or movement they're on. But as they get through it, they get better at it, and you can do it more often and more frequently. And that's what we need to do as well, because adversity will always be there.
Yeah, absolutely. And in everything. And I know you talk about that in the book. And let's talk about your the selling mastermind course you have. Tell
Yeah.
me about that and how much of reinventing yourself is involved in that, or is that a separate course away from the reinventing yourself that you teach?
Well, it's interesting. They're all dovetailed together some ways, no
Okay.
doubt. But this is interesting. So what I've had to do with my business, and whether you use the word pivot or shift, I've had to change as well. You know, I was up and coming and working on being a top-notch keynote speaker. Well, I'm not in front of many audiences right now, except virtually. So
Right.
I've shifted that in my business. You mentioned about the masterminds that we've created for online. This is now gone virtual, something that I used to do in person, and facilitate these. It's peer group learning where we pull together people of professional selling status. And every month, what we do is we give a learning theme. We create a podcast with excellent speakers on sales so that they can learn from it. We also put together a newsletter for the individuals, and this helps them consistently transform and get better in the areas of their skills, knowledge, and tools. And finally, one-on-one coaching with myself so that we can talk about whatever they're interested in at the time, closing an opportunity, improving relationships. These are all the things that happen in the professional selling mastermind on a monthly basis.
Awesome. What do you see from the people that you are doing this training with, and just the people that you talk with? What's the biggest thing in sales training right now that's lacking? What do you see out there that if you could say, you know, when I talk to people, this is the number one thing that I see that's really lacking right now?
I'll say relevance, timely relevance.
Okay.
People still training and looking to coach what they did 6 months ago, a year ago. That's not relevant now. What all salespeople need to do right now, and I share this with you as I am my clients, and in fact, it's our first topic in July for the Mastermind Professional Selling, it's virtual selling. And we're going to look at the 5 ways to gain, keep, and grow client relationships. That's going to be huge right now. Salespeople are confused. If I can't get in front of people personally, how do I sell? There are ways to do it. You need to pivot. You need to shift. You need to upgrade your skills, tools, and knowledge. In the tools area, you better get good with Zoom. You better be able to handle the data that you have in your CRM and collect that and use it correctly on front-end email prospecting. Did you know that emails are the #1 prospecting tool now over anything else? So that's hugely important.
Yeah.
So all salespeople have to look at this and shift the way that they look at every sales stage in the sales process. Earlier, I mentioned about the importance of having a company-wide, repeatable winning sales process from prospecting right through to closing. And in each of those segments of a sales process, in each phase now, we're using different tools to accomplish that phase, from prospecting to qualifying to creating a solution and presenting it. How do you present your solution now? It's much different. I'll give you one quick example of a company that I'm working with that sells equipment to fast food restaurants, from the deep fryers and things like that. And they do that globally. They've set it up now so that they have one individual in their main office where they used to bring in people to demonstrate their equipment. And that'll be done virtually. The salesperson connects with this person and the client. They create a Zoom call and they go on and present that equipment virtually, just as if they were there. That's a pivot. That's a shift where they're still bringing their client the value and showing them the solution virtually. So
I
that's
think, yeah, I like that. The term pivot is very similar to reinventing yourself. I mean, those two, reinventing and pivot. But I was talking with someone earlier this week on the podcast, and they lost a whole vertical basically because that vertical no longer, because of the COVID, was gone. So they had to pivot and look at other avenues. So I think there's similarities there. From a professional salesperson, you have to be able to pivot yourself or reinvent the way that you approach customers, like you were talking about, how you communicate. I think that's just so important.
It is, and we're going to show the 5 top ways to do that in the July session of the Mastermind for Professional Selling.
Let's talk about that picture behind you where you got the boxing glove on, and tell me a little bit about that and how did that all come about?
Well, that's a great question, and I do use it because I like to. People have asked me, "Well, you're a motivational speaker." I said, "No, I'm an informative subject matter speaker, but I like to speak with motivation."
Yeah.
My motivation behind that was really that I wanted to reinvent myself so that I could be more of a philanthropist. How do I give back? And I wanted to give back to a cause which is near and dear to me, as it is many people, which is cancer.
Right.
And how do we build awareness and funds to help fight cancer? And one of the top 5 cancer hospitals in the world is here in Toronto, Canada, where I'm located. It's called Princess Margaret, and they hold an annual event run by some people, Jen and Verge out of KBC Boxing in Toronto. And what they do is hold it like a gala event night. And really, they take a bunch of, I'll say, non-fighting, white-collar type people and train them for over 8 months to step in the ring and fight cancer.
Wow.
So I took on this initiative because I wanted to also reinvent myself away from some of the sports activities that I was doing and try something new. I always like a challenge. Well, this was a major challenge for me. So they took individuals like myself and trained us. And throughout the 8 months, we built awareness and funds to fight cancer. And then, of course, we had the large gala event night where I actually signed an amateur fighting card and stepped in the ring. So it was a massive event that through that 8 months tested me in so many ways, not just physically, but mentally as well, and had me grow exponentially. And it was a great learning experience as well for me.
Did you train, actually train like an actual boxer? Did you have someone train you with that type of rigorous physical, what a boxer is going to go through?
Yeah, absolutely. We were training at least 4 times a week, 2 to 3 hours every time. And it was interesting. I'll tell you a story. Coming off playing, I cycle, I played hockey all my life. I thought, you know what, I'm in pretty good shape. They said, okay, show up for the conditioning, which is 1 hour, 3 times a week, and we'll see how you do. I remember the first couple of weeks after the conditioning sessions, the next day, I couldn't scratch my head. I couldn't hold my hair because I couldn't raise my arms up. So it tested me and pushed me in ways which I like. It taught me where my ceiling was, and what I tell people now as well, how you punch through it. And that's what I learned to do, and that's what I teach people as well in growth and in the book and Reinventing Yourself. So yes, we did train. Yes, we did spar. I signed an amateur card and stepped in the ring, and it was a real fight. And so, and it's nothing compared to what people who are fighting cancer go through. And
Right.
That's why we raised over $1 million at this event. And
Wow.
we have 500 people. They've done it for several years, 500 people at a Vegas style gala event. And it's just incredible. And it's fight10cancer.com if you want to contribute or be part of it. So I put myself on the line to do that. It's still a great organization, and I still contribute and support it in every way that I can. And I take the things that I learned, put it in the book. I talk about it on stage. I talk about it with the sales individuals and leaders that I help be the best that they can be as well. So that's something that I did to give back.
Awesome. Yeah, I don't think people realize how hard, and I've never boxed, but 3 minutes in the, I'm assuming that's what it was, 3-minute rounds like that,
Yeah.
you've got to be wore out.
It's incredible. And even though we trained and I'll say, you know, I was in the top condition that I possibly could be at the end of the 3 rounds, yeah, you're exhausted. You're absolutely exhausted and what you went through to get there, but it's a huge accomplishment as well. So it's something that I don't expect everybody to do, but any way that we can give back, any way that we can help energize ourselves and help others is something that I think we should be looking to do.
Let's talk about you've got a keynote, the evolution of the customer, the 4 generations involved in today's buying process, and technology's effect on selling. I think that's appropriate for the Sales Vitamin podcast just because of the application of that. Let's talk about that. And what's that all about?
Well, thank you. You know, I like to get on stage and inform people. And it's interesting that right now, first time in history, we have 4 generations in the workplace. And when we look at the 4 generations that we have, they tend to have different buying structures, different buying habits. And I have a lot of fun to compare, you know, the baby boomers to the Xers like myself and how we grew up and what we do. And then the millennials as well. And we always kid about the millennials. But we have to be very careful kidding about the millennials because as of this year, over 50% of decision makers in organizations are millennials.
Yeah, they're the new buyers.
They're the buyers now. That's who's buying the product. So it doesn't matter how much experience I have, what great suit I wear, anything else. You have to tailor yourself to their buying habits. Interestingly enough as well, that before the different generations come into play, we only sold one way. Now we have to learn to sell different ways depending on who we're in front of. And there's 2 factors to that. One is generation, but the other as well is personality styles. And I don't get into it now, but I do talk about personality styles and coach people on understanding different personality styles and how to sell to them. The 4 major ones on DISC profile, when we look at it, being amiable, analytical, expressive, and driver. You have to know how to deal with each and every one of those. From the generational side, we have to understand that if we're dealing with, say, the millennial generation, we have to understand that they get 6 to 8 pieces of data before even calling a salesperson. Before calling a salesperson. A couple decades ago when I was driving around in my car selling, you had to phone me. I had the information. I was the key holder to that. And I'd drive to your location, we'd have a meeting, I'd spread out the information in front of you, and we'd have a discussion. They get all that online now.
Yeah.
They are so far around the buying cycle. When they do get a hold of a salesperson, they have so much knowledge already. It's a different way to sell to that generation. The other thing they do, John, which is really interesting, is that they work collaboratively. I always worked in a vacuum. I don't need anybody. I'm on an island. I'll get it done. That's the Xer type generation, right?
Oh, yeah.
Get out of my way. I'll get it done or die trying. But they work collaboratively. They work smarter. And I'll give you an example of that. My son moved to Toronto. He was outside doing schooling for a period of time, moved back to Toronto, had a dog with him, and he needed a veterinarian. He just put it out on social media and said, hey, what's the best vet in Toronto? Boom, 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 got several answers back and so on. I wasn't even involved in the process. Salespeople aren't involved. They're getting all this great information. That's why we teach salespeople nowadays challenger selling techniques. How do you challenge the information that the buyer's already got to position you better in that sale? So generations make a huge difference on how we sell and who you're dealing with. So we have a lot of fun talking about that, but it's imperative that you understand the differences in the generations.
Yeah, I think you're dead on. And then you start talking about the Gen Z and, you know, boy, they just as soon, like you said, click a couple buttons and take care of it. So, and you've really got to be a facilitator nowadays, be able to facilitate the sales process because of what you were talking about, because they collaborate. Right. There may be one decision maker, but there's a ton of influencers typically.
Yeah, very good point. There are different influencers. So how do you get involved in that? Well, you start using the tools of today. And the tools of today include social media. How are you making use of social media as a salesperson so that you're involved in that data collection early on in the sales stages? Now you're part of the conversation, not later on when it comes down to price. You're involved earlier on in the decision process because as salespeople, we always need to be bringing value to our clients. How do you bring value now? to this generation in this day and age, upfront on social media, digitally. That's how you start bringing them value. It's the reason that, John, you're doing these podcasts. I do podcasts.
Right.
I get involved in them. I send out information, and I utilize that social media upfront so that people understand, okay, this person has credibility in this area. I wouldn't mind going to them for some of that information. Now we're involved early on in the conversation in the sales cycle. Again, that is a change in how we sell.
Yeah. Is when you talk about reinventing yourself, do you see that as one of the bigger barriers for maybe the Gen Xers or even the older? Is that technology side and kind of learning that piece of it from a sales standpoint?
Absolutely. It's our acceptance to it. It's our adaptability to it. We can't just embrace it and understand it. We have to adapt and then lead that change as well and get involved in it. And the interesting part is, and this is great because I like to share people, how do we work as a team? That collaboration, team environment needs to penetrate your sales organization as a whole. We can't have people out on islands. The older generation have a lot to add in relationship building and
Right.
have that back to different generations. The younger generations can be teaching the older generations about technology. How do we use this social media to affect, and what is it that you and your generation, your age group are looking for? We need to listen. And that's where, instead of pointing out the differences in our generation, let's harness the similarities and let's see how we can collaboratively work together as a team. And team selling is becoming more and more the norm than the individual, where it used to just be the hunter that we talked about. Now we're talking about a team selling approach, because as well, that's what generations are used to. They're used to talking to many people, not just one-on-one.
Yeah, that's a good point. We probably need to talk a little bit about that. You're selling where you grew up and where I grew up. You handled the sale end zone to end zone or cradle to grave. And now it's exactly like you said. You may have people that, they're outbound and they're going to set appointments for you. Then you're going to go do, the majority of the selling. And then you may hand it off on the backside. What are your thoughts on that from a standpoint of the professional sales and where we're going? You've almost segmented the sales process.
Yeah, you have. And that's a good point. Again, it's how we need to change as salespeople. And I'll coin a phrase from one of my teammates that I boxed with. And we learned a lot in boxing, and you'll find a lot of it in the stories that are in Reinventing Yourself. And some of them are quite humbling on my part, I'll share with you. But it's the same way here. And what he said to me was that your ego is not your amigo.
Yeah.
You have to get rid of the ego. You got to put it aside so that you can learn and grow from others. It doesn't matter how many gray hairs you have, how many decades of selling. It's changed. And if we're going to be part of that change and adapt to it and then lead it, we need to be able to listen to others and get rid of the ego, regardless of how old you are, how successful you are. We need to look to reinvent ourselves on a regular basis.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I've got one question for you to end, but before we do that, tell everybody where they can get a hold of Rick Denley. What's the best place to get a hold of you? They can get the book obviously on Amazon or at your website, but what's the best place for them to get a hold of you?
You can follow me on Instagram at Denley Rick. You can look me up on LinkedIn, and please do, Rick Denley. But more than anything, head on over to my website, www.rickdenley.com. What you'll find there are all of the offerings, the support system that's in place, and the networking so that you can continually reinvent yourself, stay on top of your game, especially now in these more than ever challenging times. Look, John, what I try and do is just connect good people. And
Right.
on my website, you'll see that that's available to you with the vast amount of contacts that I have, whether it be through a mastermind, whether it be through a podcast. There's all sorts of ways to connect to these great people that I'm really grateful to have in my circle at this time.
One thing you had on your website that I know the people will enjoy is you have these videos. They're like 1-minute videos, 1-minute kind of motivational videos. Those are really cool. And there's value in those. I really thought those were good.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Staying motivated is very important. Having high energy is very important as well. So I like to share those. So you can go on there on Instagram. You'll see them every Monday morning with me. and I'll
Okay.
give you a motivational Monday minute. And if you like, you can catch up on the backlog of them over on my website as well, where you can also see me speak. You can see the podcasts that I've run, including one recently on post-COVID comebacks with some
Okay.
excellent panel guests too. So head on over to www.rickdenley.com for more information.
All right. So the last question for you is, you've got one sales vitamin to give, and you've got a professional salesperson, and you've got one sales vitamin. They're going to reinvent themselves. What's the most important thing that you could tell them? The one sales vitamin, they're going to reinvent themselves through that process. What's the one vitamin they're going to need?
I'm going to say grit.
Okay.
You know, Angela Duckworth wrote a great book on grit, where she studied organizations, athletes, Olympic athletes, NFL athletes, politicians, and so on, to find out what was the one thing that made them all successful. And she boiled it down to the word grit. You got to bring the grit. And grit's made up of two main things. One is passion, and the other is persistence. So what I'd say the vitamin that you should be taking every day is grit. Bring your passion, bring your persistence, regardless of what change comes our way. You'll be able to reinvent yourself into what you need to be to consistently bring value to your clients and others around you that you lead.
Awesome. That was a jar full there. So they got a lot of vitamins there. Rick Denley, he's the author of Reinvent Yourself. He's a transformational growth expert, a sales expert. You know where to reach him at his website, and there's his book right there. He's showing it to you. We'll have that up on video. Rick, it's been great to have you. I know your time is valuable, so I just appreciate you coming on the show, and I know that people are going to get a lot of value from this, and I appreciate your commitment to the cancer and that cause, and for the book you've written, and the way you've brought that out, and what you're doing. So thank you for coming on today.
Thank you so much for your time today, and to your viewers as well for listening. I hope it's been helpful, and I look forward to working with them. I want to meet more people that are out there with a real mission that they're on to help other individuals. Thanks, John.
You bet. Absolutely.